My son gave the luxury suite I had reserved to his in-laws and told me they need it more than you do. Then he had the hotel staff move me to a smaller room because I was apparently getting forgetful. I took the new key without arguing. What he didn't know was that I owned 72% of the hotel, and I already had copies of every email he'd sent about me. Nathan didn't say anything for 11 seconds. I counted them the way I count contractions when I'm bracing for pain I know is coming but can't yet feel. A habit left over from childbirth, 40 years gone, that apparently never leaves the body. Rebecca's mother set down her wine glass without drinking from it. Her father looked at the tablecloth like it owed him an explanation. Ava didn't look at anyone but me, and there was something in her face I hadn't seen since she was 11, and figured out Santa was a story adults told to buy themselves time. That's not, Nathan started, then stopped, because there was nothing to finish the sentence with. Frank Delgado, the general manager, stood beside my chair with the reservation folder still open in his hands. And men like Frank don't hand a document to a room full of people unless they're certain of what's in it. I'd like the room returned to my name tonight, I said. Not tomorrow, tonight. Frank nodded. Already handled, Mrs. Shaw. Housekeeping is moving the linens back as we speak. Nathan's jaw worked like he was chewing on something that wouldn't go down. Rebecca reached for his hand under the table, and he let her take it, which told me more than anything he could have said. A man who believes he's about to be vindicated doesn't need his wife's hand. A man who knows he's about to be caught does. I stood, gathered my cane, and thanked the table for a lovely dinner, because I am still, after everything, a woman who was raised to leave a room gracefully, even when the people in it have just tried to take something from me. I told myself that would be the end of it. That was my first mistake of the weekend, and it wouldn't be my last. I'd raised Nathan to believe that Harbor Crest belonged to all of us in spirit, even after his father died and the ownership settled entirely on paper into my name. Richard and I built the place from a 22-room motel on Route 9 into a 140-room property with a James Beard semi-finalist running the restaurant, and for 30 years, I never once made Nathan feel like a guest in his own family's legacy. I paid for his business school. I co-signed his first commercial lease when the bank wouldn't. When his real estate venture with 2 college friends folded in 2019, I quietly absorbed the loss and never mentioned it again, not even when he forgot to thank me. What I never did, what I'd decided deliberately the year Richard died, was hand him the hotel. I remember the conversation that decided it. 3 weeks after the funeral, Nathan sitting across my kitchen table asking whether the transition paperwork was basically a formality at this point. Not grief, not even curiosity about how his father had built the place from nothing. Just a question about paperwork, asked with the flat impatience of someone confirming a delivery date. I told him nothing was decided yet, and watched something in his face close like a door being pulled to, quietly, without a slam. I don't think he ever forgave me for that hesitation, though I've never been sure whether he was angry that I doubted him, or angry that I'd been right to. Ava was the one who used to sit with me in the back office doing homework while I reviewed occupancy reports. She was the one who asked at 14 why the housekeeping staff turnover was so high, and then actually listened to the answer. She'd interned at Harbor Crest every summer since she was 17, and 6 months ago she'd told me, quietly, over coffee, that she wanted to run it someday. Not inherit it, run it. I never told Nathan I'd started drafting a succession plan that named her. I'd wanted to tell him gently, in my own time, in a way that didn't feel like a verdict on the son he was, instead of the son I'd needed for the business. I see now that my silence left a vacuum, and vacuums get filled by whoever's standing closest with the most to gain. That was Walter Combs. Rebecca's father wasn't just a retiree celebrating 40 years of marriage that weekend. He ran Combs Development out of an office park 20 minutes from the hotel, and for 18 months he'd been trying to acquire the 4 acres of undeveloped lot adjacent to Harbor Crest, land I owned personally, not through the corporation, land I had specifically declined to sell 3 separate times because Combs Development builds the kind of glass box mixed-use complex that turns a boutique property into a parking view. The first time Walter approached me, at a Rotary fundraiser 2 years back, he'd been almost charming about it, sliding a business card across a cocktail table like we were old friends discussing a favor. The second time, he'd brought an appraiser's letter, unsolicited, valuing the lot at a figure I knew was inflated to make refusal look foolish. The third time, this past January, he'd stopped being charming at all. He told me, over a phone call I hadn't asked for, that I was sitting on land I'd never use, out of spite for a family that only wanted to grow. I'd hung up on him mid-sentence and told Diane to send a formal letter making clear the lot wasn't for sale. Full stop. No further contact. I hadn't thought to wonder, until much later, whether Nathan had known about that letter, or whether he'd been in the room the day his father-in-law decided a direct approach wasn't going to work, and a different one was needed. I didn't know any of that yet, standing at the elevator that first night. I only knew my son had lied to a hotel full of strangers about my memory to steal a room, and that I was tired enough to let it go until morning. Sunday morning, Ava found me in the lobby drinking coffee before the family breakfast none of us were going to enjoy. Dad was up until 3, she said, on his laptop. I got up for water and his study door was open a crack. He wasn't sleeping, Grandma. He was working. Working on what? I don't know, but he closed it fast when he heard me in the hall. And this morning he told Mom they need to move quickly before she gets ahead of it. Ava's voice caught on the word she. He meant you. I told her it was probably nothing, that people say strange things when they're embarrassed, and embarrassment makes even reasonable men reckless for a night. I believed that, mostly, because it was easier than the alternative. Nathan and Rebecca left before checkout, citing a work call Rebecca supposedly had Monday morning, and I watched their Escalade pull out of the circular drive at 7:40 a.m. and told myself the weekend was simply, finally, over. Sunday evening, back at my own kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside me, the front desk called. Not Frank. A young supervisor named Priya Chandra, careful and a little nervous, the way people get when they suspect they're reporting something above their pay grade. I probably shouldn't mention this, she said, but Mrs. Combs, your son's wife, asked to use the business center printer Saturday afternoon, and the printer log shows 2 documents. One was a hotel comment card. The other was a blank durable power of attorney template, downloaded from a legal forms website. I only noticed because the printer flagged it as oversized and I had to reload paper. I told her she'd done the right thing calling, and I told myself, once I'd hung up, that people print all kinds of things for all kinds of reasons, that Rebecca might have been helping her own aging mother, that a blank form wasn't evidence of anything. I wanted, badly, for that to be true. I've learned since that wanting something to be an innocent coincidence is not the same as it being one, and that the gap between those two things is exactly where people like Nathan and Walter do their best work. I called Nathan Sunday night, the first time, before I knew anything about a petition. I only asked gently whether everything was all right, whether the weekend had upset him more than he'd let on at dinner. He told me I was reading into things as usual, and that he needed to get Ava settled before her drive back to school. I let it go. That was the last time all weekend I let anything go without a fight. By Monday afternoon, I understood exactly what I'd been letting go of. Frank Delgado has run the day-to-day of Harbor Crest for 22 years, since he was a 26-year-old night auditor Richard promoted out of pure stubborn faith. I trust very few people with the operational truth of that building, and Frank is at the top of a very short list. I asked him over the phone Monday to pull the access logs for the owner portal, the system that shows real-time reservations, corporate financials, and board documents, for the 2 weeks before the trip. He called back in 40 minutes, which told me he hadn't needed to dig. There were 3 login attempts last Thursday night, he said. Using an old credential set where a shared owner login your husband set up in 2015 for emergency access. It should have been deactivated when Mr. Shaw passed. It wasn't. I'm sorry, Mrs. Shaw, that's on me. Who logged in? IP address traces back to a residential address in Fairview Heights. He read it out. It was Nathan Street. He'd downloaded 18 months of financial statements. He'd pulled the shareholder registry, which listed in black and white that I held 72% of Harbor Crest Hospitality Group, that a family trust held 9% earmarked for Ava on her 30th birthday, and that Nathan himself held nothing beyond a symbolic 1% Richard had given him at 21, largely so he'd feel included at shareholder meetings he rarely attended. Frank didn't say much else on the phone, but I could hear something in the silence after. The specific quiet of a man who'd spent half his career being loyal to a family, and was only now realizing that loyalty had been asked of him in only one direction. Richard used to tell me the numbers don't lie, even when people do, he said finally. I always thought that was about running a hotel. I'm sorry it turned out to be about this too. I told him none of it was his fault, and meant it, though some small, tired part of me wished, briefly, that a credential from 2015 had simply been deleted the way it should have been, and none of the rest of this had ever needed to happen. My hands didn't shake yet. That came later. Monday afternoon, what I felt was something colder and more useful, the particular clarity that arrives right before you stop giving someone the benefit of the doubt. I called Diane Okafor. Diane has been my attorney for 11 years, since she handled the trust restructuring after Richard's death, and she has the kind of calm on the phone that makes you brace for bad news before she said a word. I was going to call you today, she said. Someone from a firm called Pierce and Vantage phoned my office Friday asking whether I still represented you. My paralegal, being new, confirmed it before checking with me. I found out this morning and I am furious about it, Eleanor, but I need you to hear what I did after. Tell me. I searched the county e-filing portal. There's an open matter. I found out this morning and I am furious about it, Eleanor, but I need you to hear what I did after. Tell me. I searched the county e-filing portal. There's an open matter in RE conservatorship of Eleanor M. Shaw, filed Sunday night at 9:52 p.m. by your son, represented by a Todd Pierce, requesting the court appoint him temporary conservator of your person and estate on grounds of, and I'm reading directly, documented cognitive decline consistent with early-stage impairment, evidenced by erratic financial behavior, confusion regarding property ownership, and risk of imminent self-harm through mismanagement of assets. I sat down on the edge of my bed. My knee, the one that never fully recovered from the fall in March, buckled a little, and I let it, because there wasn't anyone there to see. He used the fall, I said. There's an exhibit attached. A letter from a Dr. Sandra Kepler, geriatric psychiatry, licensed in this state. It references a chart review and a phone consultation with, quote, family members with direct daily knowledge of the patient's condition. I've never met a Dr. Kepler in my life. I believe you, Diane said. Which means either she's lying about examining you, or someone gave her access to records she shouldn't have had, and she built a report off secondhand claims and a chart she never should have opened. Either way, it's a problem for her license before it's a problem for us. How did he even get my chart? That's what I need you to think hard about. Any release, any authorization form, anything you might have signed after the fall in March that named Nathan as a contact. I remembered it then, the way you remember a door you left unlocked only after you've noticed something missing from the house. The orthopedic surgeon's office, the week after my knee surgery, a stack of intake forms I'd signed half-drugged on pain medication. Nathan sitting beside me filling in the boxes because my hand wouldn't cooperate with a pen yet. He'd listed himself as my care coordination contact. I'd thanked him for it at the time. There's a form, I said quietly, from March. I don't remember everything on it. That's likely your access point right there. It wouldn't authorize a full psychiatric evaluation, but it might have been enough for an office to release records to someone who represented himself as coordinating your care. We'll get the actual document from the clinic and see exactly what he checked off and what he didn't. Diane paused. Eleanor, there's a hearing date. It's not a full hearing. It's ex parte. The judge reviews it in chambers and can grant temporary emergency authority without you present if she finds imminent risk. It's set for Thursday, 9 a.m. Thursday was 3 days away. I did the math on what temporary emergency authority would mean by Friday, and my stomach dropped the way it does on the back half of a roller coaster, that half second where your body understands the fall before your mind catches up. There's a board meeting Friday, I said slowly. 10 a.m. Combs Development's lease proposal for the adjacent lot is on the agenda. I tabled it in March. I was going to table it again. Diane was quiet for a moment. If Nathan is granted even temporary conservatorship of your estate by Thursday, he could vote your shares Friday. All of them. 72%. I said. That's not a vote. That's a coronation. I want to tell you I confronted Nathan immediately, that I marched into this with my temper up and my lawyer beside me. I didn't. I called him Monday night instead, alone, because some stubborn part of me still believed there was a version of my son underneath this who would hear his mother's voice and stop. I know about the petition, I said. There was a long pause. The kind that tells you someone is deciding which lie to try first. Mom, it's not what you think. Dr. Kepler is a respected physician. She reviewed your fall records, your surgical recovery, the medication schedule, which you had no legal right to access. I'm still listed as your emergency healthcare contact from the knee surgery. That's not illegal. That's proactive. You told a doctor I never met that I'm cognitively impaired so you could take control of my company before a board vote you knew I'd oppose. You're twisting this into something ugly because you can't stand that for once. Someone else made a decision about this family without asking your permission first. You wanted the hotel and you never got it, so you decided if you couldn't have it fairly, you'd take it another way, I said. Is that closer to the truth? Don't psychoanalyze me, Mom. You're good at that. Standing above everyone, deciding who's capable and who isn't. You did it to Dad's brother. You're doing it to me. Your uncle emptied 2 accounts before anyone caught him. I'm not comparing you to a thief. Not yet, he said. And there was something in the way he said it, flat, almost daring me, that told me he already knew exactly how this would sound someday. Read back to him in a courtroom. There it was. The mask slipping, just a hairline crack. Just enough to see what was underneath, not concern. Resentment, 30 years deep, about a business he'd never been trusted to run and a daughter who'd been trusted with it instead. Withdraw the petition, I said, tonight, and I'll consider this a family matter instead of a criminal one. There's nothing criminal about protecting my mother. There's plenty criminal about forging a healthcare authorization and lying to a judge, Nathan. I'd like you to think very hard tonight about which one of us is actually protecting this family. He hung up first. I sat with the phone in my lap for a long time afterward, in a house that felt too quiet, and I let myself cry exactly once, for exactly 4 minutes, and then I called Diane back and told her to do whatever it took. Dr. Priya Anand's office was on the 3rd floor of a medical building I'd driven past 100 times without noticing, and I spent the drive over Wednesday morning rehearsing answers to questions I hadn't been asked yet, the way you rehearse for an exam even when you know the material cold, because some part of you never stops being afraid of being found wanting. She didn't waste time on pleasantries once we sat down. Word recall. 10 items, delayed by 20 minutes while we talked about something else entirely. Serial 7s, counting backward from 100, which I did faster than I expected to, out of something close to spite. A clock face I had to draw from memory, all 12 numbers in their places, the hands set to 10 past 11. She asked about my medications, and I listed them without hesitation. A statin, a blood pressure prescription, the anti-inflammatory for my knee, nothing else, nothing that touched my memory or my judgment, and certainly nothing that matched the medication mismanagement language language in Nathan's petition. "Tell me about the weekend that brought you here," she said near the end, and I told her plainly, without editorializing, exactly what had happened at the hotel and afterward. She wrote for a long time without looking up. "For what it's worth," she said, capping her pen, "in 20 years of doing this, the people who actually have something to hide rarely walk in as prepared as you did. They're vague. They deflect. You gave me dates, names, dollar amounts. That's not what impairment looks like. That's what someone being falsely accused looks like. It wasn't a diagnosis. It wasn't meant to be comfort. But I held on to it the whole drive home anyway, repeating it under my breath at red lights like a woman rehearsing a line she intended to use later, which, in a sense, I was. Wednesday afternoon, Marcus Levin came to my house with a laptop bag and the unhurried manner of a man who has spent 20 years finding numbers that don't want to be found. He's a certified fraud examiner Diane had used twice before, and within 6 hours of getting access to Nathan's public business filings, the county recorder's office, and, with Frank's help, the hotel's vendor and financial records, he had a picture I hadn't wanted to see. Nathan's real estate venture with Walter Combs wasn't a partnership. It was a debt. Nathan had personally guaranteed $340,000 against a stalled development 11 miles north, a project that had been bleeding money since a permitting dispute in 2023. Walter held the note. Walter had, according to a text message thread Marcus recovered from a public records request tied to a related civil filing, offered to restructure the whole thing, make it disappear, in exchange for one thing: Harbor Crest's board approving a 99-year ground lease on my adjacent lot, at a rate Marcus called, without inflection, aggressively below market. "There's more," Marcus said, and slid a printed page across my kitchen table. "A DocuSign record, a proxy authorization, purportedly signed by you in April, granting Nathan power to vote your shares in the event of incapacity." I pulled the certificate of completion. The signature timestamp is 11:14 p.m., Saturday night. This past Saturday, the night of the anniversary dinner. The IP address matches a hotel guest network. "He signed my name from his own hotel room," I said. "The same night he tried to convince a table full of family that I couldn't be trusted to remember my own medication. The forgery isn't even good," Marcus said, and for the first time all afternoon, something like sympathy crossed his face. He didn't think anyone would check. Most people don't. Most families settle these things before anyone thinks to preserve metadata. He clicked to another tab, methodical, unhurried, a man who has learned that panic destroys evidence faster than any cover-up does. "I've exported the certificate, the IP resolution, and the account creation logs to a secured drive and given Diane a copy with a documented chain of custody. If this ends up in front of a judge, I don't want anyone arguing the file could have been altered after the fact." He turned the laptop toward me so I could see the timeline he'd built. A simple spreadsheet, dates down the left column, each one anchored to a bank record, a phone log, a text thread pulled from the civil filing. April 3rd, a text from Walter to Nathan. "She won't budge on the lot. We need another way in." June 19th, Nathan's personal guarantee on the stalled development notarized. 2 weeks ago, a call between Nathan and a number registered to Dr. Kepler's office, 4 minutes long, the same day the chart review was supposedly completed. It read less like a family disagreement and more like a project plan, each entry a small, deliberate brick in a wall being built around my own signature. "There's a phrase for what this is," Marcus said, closing the laptop gently, "the way you'd close a door on a room you didn't enjoy being in. Financial elder exploitation. It doesn't always look like a stranger emptying an account. Sometimes it looks exactly you didn't enjoy being in. Financial elder exploitation. It doesn't always look like a stranger emptying an account. Sometimes it looks exactly like this: a family member with legitimate access, building a paper trail slowly enough that no single document looks alarming on its own." My hands were shaking by then, not from fear, from the specific, useless anger of watching someone you carried on your hip 40 years ago build a case for your incompetence out of nothing but your own trust in him. Thursday morning arrived with 17 hours of preparation behind it and a hearing time that felt like a held breath. Diane had spent Wednesday night filing an emergency response and notice of appearance, along with 3 exhibits: Marcus's forensic report on the forged proxy and the financial motive behind it, Frank's sworn statement on the unauthorized portal access, and, the one I'd been most afraid to arrange, an independent cognitive evaluation. Dr. Priya Anand is a neuropsychologist Diane found through the county bar's referral list, someone with no connection to me, Nathan, or Harbor Crest. She'd examined me Wednesday afternoon in her office. 2 full hours of memory testing, executive function tasks, a conversation about my medication history that made clear, in writing, on letterhead, that I recalled the events of my fall in March with more precision than the doctor administering the test. Her report used a word I have thought about every day since: unremarkable. My cognition was unremarkable. It was the single best insult I have ever been paid. I wasn't allowed in the judge's chambers for the ex parte review. "That's not how it works," Diane explained. "The judge reviews the papers and either grants, denies, or converts it to a noticed hearing." We sat in a hallway outside Judge Corinne Ashby's courtroom at 8:40 a.m. Diane on one side of me, Ava on the other, because Ava had refused flatly to stay home. If Dad's going to do this, she'd said, I'm not going to let him do it without me watching. My phone buzzed at 8:44. Nathan's name on the screen, no text first, just a call, which he almost never did anymore. I let it ring twice before I answered, mostly because Diane's hand had gone still on my arm, a silent question. I nodded and picked up. Don't do this, he said, before I'd even said hello. His voice had none of Saturday's polish left in it. If you let this go forward, it's public record. Everyone finds out. Is that really what you want? For the whole family to watch this happen? You filed a petition to have me declared incompetent, Nathan. You made it public the moment you signed it. I can still fix it. Withdraw before the hearing. Tell Diane to stand down and none of this has to go further. You called me 20 minutes before a judge decides whether I'm capable of running my own life? I said, to ask me to protect you from the consequences of trying to end it. Think about how that sounds. He didn't have an answer for that. I heard Rebecca's voice somewhere behind him, muffled, and then the line went dead. I sat with the phone warm in my palm for a long moment, and Ava reached over and took my other hand without a word. And that was the version of support I actually needed that morning. Not an apology, just someone willing to sit in the hard part with me. Todd Pierce arrived at 8:52, Nathan a step behind him in a suit I recognized from his father's funeral, his tie slightly crooked in a way that told me the phone call hadn't gone the way he'd hoped it would. He didn't look at me in the hallway. Rebecca wasn't there at all, which I noticed, and filed away. The next 40 minutes were the longest of my life, longer than the 4 hours I'd spent in a recovery room after my knee surgery, because at least anesthesia gives you the mercy of not watching the clock. Diane reviewed her notes without needing to. I think she did it so her hands would have something to do besides notice mine. Ava counted ceiling tiles out loud, a habit from childhood I hadn't seen in 15 years, and I let her, because some coping mechanisms deserve to survive into adulthood. Diane's hand found mine somewhere around the 30-minute mark, and neither of us mentioned it. At 9:31, a clerk called us in, not for the ex parte review, which Diane's overnight filing had converted automatically into a contested proceeding, but for Judge Ashby to address both sides directly. She was younger than I expected, with the unhurried precision of someone who has read every page in front of her twice. I've reviewed the petition, the exhibits, and the response filed last night, she said. Mr. Pierce, before we go further, I want to understand something. Your exhibit includes a psychiatric evaluation from a Dr. Kepler. Did Dr. Kepler examine Mrs. Shaw in person? Todd Pierce hesitated half a second too long. My understanding is the evaluation was based on a records review and family consultation, Your Honor, which is a recognized. Mrs. Shaw's counsel has submitted a full neuropsychological evaluation performed in person yesterday by an independent, board-certified examiner, finding no impairment. I'm also looking at a forensic accounting report alleging the proxy document attached to your petition was signed via an IP address registered to the hotel where the parties were both staying, at a timestamp during a dinner your client attended. And I have a sworn statement that your client accessed corporate financial systems using a deactivated credential 4 days before filing this petition. She set the papers down. Mr. Pierce, I'll ask you plainly. Do you want to withdraw this petition, or would you like me to proceed to findings? Nathan's face had gone the color of the tablecloth from Saturday night. Pierce conferred with him in a whisper I couldn't hear and didn't need to. We withdraw the petition, Your Honor. The petition is dismissed with prejudice, Judge Ashby said. Mrs. Shaw, given the nature of these exhibits, I'm going to refer this matter to the county's Adult Protective Services Elder Financial Exploitation Unit, and I'd strongly suggest, Mr. Pierce, that your client retain separate criminal counsel before that referral is contacted, given the forgery allegations on the record. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the way you feel after you finally set down something heavy you didn't realize you'd been carrying with both arms, relief that arrives indistinguishable for a moment from exhaustion. Outside the courthouse, Nathan caught up to me on the steps, Todd Pierce a careful few paces behind, already on his phone with someone else, already moving on. Mom, he started, and I stopped, because some part of me even then wanted to hear whatever came next. But what came next was, this doesn't have to be the end of things, delivered in the same tone he'd have used to describe a delayed flight, an inconvenience rather than a reckoning. I didn't answer him. I let Ava take my arm instead, and we walked to the car in the kind of silence that isn't empty so much as full of 30 years of a mother giving a son the benefit of every doubt, and one Thursday morning, finally, quietly, running out. The consequences didn't take long to compound, the way they rarely do once the truth stops being deniable. Adult Protective Services opened a formal exploitation investigation within a week. Detective Rosa Iturbide, who'd spent 9 years specializing in financial crimes against the elderly, called me herself before she called anyone else in the family, which I appreciated more than she probably realized. I want to be straightforward with you, Mrs. Shaw, she said. Cases like this usually don't come with this much documentation already assembled. Most victims spend months just proving something happened at all. You've handed me a timeline, a forensic report, and a forged signature with a clean chain of custody. That's not typical. and it's going to move faster because of it. She interviewed Frank about the portal access and Marcus about the DocuSign record, and by late the following month, the county DA's office had filed forgery and attempted fraud charges against Nathan. Dr. Kepler's medical board received a formal complaint for issuing a diagnosis without an examination. I heard secondhand months later that her license was suspended pending review. Rebecca called me once in February before she left him. She didn't apologize for the sparkling water comment or for the medication lie at dinner. I think even then she'd convinced herself those were just clumsy attempts at humor. What she said instead was that she hadn't known about the proxy, that Nathan had told her it was just paperwork to make things easier if anything ever happened, and that she was tired of finding out months later what her own husband had actually meant by things like that. I believed the part about the proxy. I didn't believe she hadn't known about the rest. Some truths people only manage to tell you halfway, and you learn eventually to take the half that's honest and leave the rest where it lies. Walter Combs's ground lease died on the agenda Friday morning, tabled permanently by a board that voted, for the first time in Harbor Crest's history, unanimously to require any future adjacent property proposal to pass through an independent real estate committee before it ever reached my desk. Combs Development's stalled project up north went into foreclosure 8 months later. I read about it in the business section, the way you read about weather in a city you used to live in. Rebecca left Nathan in the spring. I don't know all of what was said between them, only what Ava told me, that Rebecca claimed she hadn't known about the forged proxy, which might even be true, but that she'd absolutely known about the sparkling water and the medication lie, and had done it anyway, because it was easier to make me the unstable one than to say no to her own father. Nathan pled to a reduced charge in the fall, a single count of forgery, no jail time, 3 years probation, restitution for Dr. Ariazi, Kepler's fee and the court costs, and a restraining order limiting his access to Harbor Crest corporate systems that Diane insisted on, and I didn't fight. He called me twice after the plea. I didn't answer either time. Some silences aren't punishment. They're just honesty, finally, about how much a person has earned back. A year later, almost to the week, I stood at the same marble desk in the Harbor Crest lobby, and Frank Delgado handed a key card across the counter, not to me this time, but to Ava, 24 now, wearing a name badge that said General Manager in Training, a title she'd insisted be printed exactly that plainly, no euphemisms. Suite 501, Frank said. Ocean view, walk-in shower. I know the room, Ava said, and smiled at me in a way that made her look, for one unguarded second, exactly like her grandfather. The succession plan is finalized now. Signed, notarized, filed with Diane's office in triplicate. Filed with Diane's office in triplicate. Ava won't inherit control outright. I insisted on a 5-year transition, board oversight, the same structure any qualified outside hire would face, because I want her to earn the trust of the staff the way she earned mine, not simply have it handed to her because of who her grandmother is. She agreed without hesitation. I think some part of her had been waiting years for someone to finally ask her to prove it, rather than just assume it. Nathan sent a letter in June. Handwritten, the first handwriting I'd seen from him since he was a boy signing birthday cards under his father's supervision. It didn't ask for forgiveness outright. It asked whether I'd be willing to have coffee sometime. No agenda, just coffee. I read it twice and put it in the drawer where I keep Richard's old ties, not because it belongs there exactly, but because I didn't know what other drawer a thing like that goes in. I haven't answered yet. I might someday. Some doors I've learned not to close all the way, even when I have every right to, but I'm in no hurry, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, neither is anyone else. I updated my healthcare proxy that same month, formally, on paper, with Diane witnessing it herself. It isn't Nathan, and it won't be again. I don't say that with satisfaction, so much as with the plain, unsentimental clarity of a woman who has learned that love and trust are not, in fact, the same instrument, however much we'd like them to be. I still have the cane. My knee never got better. Not fully. And I've made a kind of peace with that the way you make peace with anything time simply refuses to give back. But I don't lean on it the way I did that weekend. I don't need to brace for anything anymore that a hotel room key can't fix. I didn't need the suite back to know it had always been mine. I only needed everyone else to finally remember it.